US imposes sanctions on Brazilian Supreme Court justice amid Bolsonaro probe. In a dramatic turn of events, the United States has raised the stakes in its escalating dispute with Brazil by imposing stringent sanctions on a high-ranking Brazilian judge. This move not only highlights the growing tensions between these two major nations, but also underscores how deeply intertwined their political and legal systems have become. But here's where it gets controversial. Are these sanctions an overreach of US power, or a necessary step to protect democratic values? Let's dive into what's happening and why it matters. On Wednesday, the administration of former President Donald Trump announced new punitive measures targeting Justice Alexandre de Moraes, a prominent member of Brazil's Supreme Federal Court. De Moraes is overseeing the prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro, another former president of Brazil, who faces serious charges related to his alleged involvement in a violent coup attempt following his defeat in the 2022 election. The case against Bolsonaro has sparked fierce debate both domestically and internationally, as it pits questions of national sovereignty against concerns about human rights abuses and corruption. The US Treasury Department invoked the global Magnitsky Act, a piece of legislation originally designed to target individuals accused of severe human rights violations and corruption abroad, as justification for sanctioning de Moraes. Under this law, those sanctioned cannot own property in the United States or conduct business with American citizens. According to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, de Moraes is guilty of spearheading an oppressive campaign of censorship and pursuing politically motivated prosecutions that violate fundamental freedoms. While this statement paints a damning picture of the judge, critics argue that such unilateral actions could set a dangerous precedent for international relations. De Moraes himself has yet to publicly respond to the accusations. However, colleagues and allies within Brazil's judicial system have rallied behind him, defending his actions as lawful and aligned with the country's constitution. For instance, Supreme Court Justice Flavio Dino described de Moraes' work as just and honest, emphasizing that he's merely fulfilling his duties as a jurist. This clash between Washington and Brasilia goes beyond courtroom drama. It reflects broader ideological divides. At the heart of the matter lies Bolsonaro's trial, which centers on allegations that he conspired to overthrow President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva through military force after losing the presidency. Adding fuel to the fire, Brazil's crackdown on misinformation, led by none other than de Moraes, has drawn sharp criticism from US-based tech companies and conservative figures like Trump. Critics claim that de Moraes' efforts to combat fake news infringe upon freedom of expression, while supporters argue they are essential for safeguarding democracy. To further escalate matters, Trump issued an executive order imposing a whopping 50% tariff on all goods imported from Brazil. This decision came shortly after Secretary of State Marco Rubio revoked travel visas for de Moraes and 7 other justices on Brazil's highest court, along with their families. Meanwhile, Brazilian President Lula has vowed to retaliate proportionally, signaling that the rift between these once close allies shows no signs of healing anytime soon. Legal experts are scratching their heads over the use of the Magnitsky Act in this context. Initially crafted to address atrocities committed in Russia, the law has since been applied globally, but rarely against sitting judges overseeing significant legal proceedings. Alex Brazanti, a partner at the international law firm Global Diligence, noted that expanding the scope of the Act to include cases like this represents a bold reinterpretation of its original intent. And this is the part most people miss. Does applying such laws to foreign officials undermine global cooperation, or does it uphold universal principles of justice? Interestingly, insiders suggest that the sanctions may have little practical impact on de Moraes personally. A source close to the judge revealed that he lacks meaningful ties to the US, including bank accounts, assets, or even proficiency in English. Nevertheless, the symbolic weight of the sanctions cannot be underestimated, especially given the heightened rhetoric surrounding them. As tensions continue to simmer, one thing is clear. This feud raises critical questions about the balance between upholding human rights and respecting national sovereignty. Should countries intervene when they perceive threats to democracy elsewhere? Or should they prioritize non-interference? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear whether you agree or disagree with the US's latest move. Trump sanctions Brazilian judge. An attack on democracy. Imagine a world where a foreign leader can dictate the fate of a judge in another country, simply because they disagree with the outcome of a trial. This is exactly what's happening in Brazil, where Donald Trump has been accused of launching a direct attack on Brazilian democracy by slapping sanctions on Alexandre de Moraes, the Supreme Court judge presiding over the trial of former President Jair Bolsonaro. But here's where it gets controversial. Trump's move has sparked a heated debate about the limits of foreign interference in a country's internal affairs. On one hand, Trump's allies argue that the sanctions are necessary to protect Bolsonaro from a witch hunt and ensure that he receives a fair trial. On the other hand, critics say that Trump's actions are a blatant attempt to undermine Brazilian democracy and interfere with the country's justice system. So, what's really going on here? Let's dive deeper into the story. The US Treasury's decision to impose sanctions on Moraes was announced by Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, who claimed that the judge was responsible for an oppressive campaign of censorship, arbitrary detentions that violate human rights, and politicized prosecutions. But many experts disagree with this assessment, arguing that Moraes is simply doing his job to uphold the law and ensure that those who have committed crimes are held accountable. The trial of Bolsonaro is a highly sensitive issue in Brazil, where the former president is accused of seeking to seize power after losing the 2022 presidential election. Moraes is presiding over the trial, which is expected to result in Bolsonaro being convicted and sentenced to up to 43 years in jail. But Trump's sanctions have thrown a wrench into the works, with many Brazilians seeing the move as an attempt to intimidate the judge and influence the outcome of the trial. And this is the part that most people miss. The sanctions are not just about Bolsonaro, but about the broader implications for Brazilian democracy. By imposing sanctions on a judge, Trump is essentially saying that he has the power to dictate how Brazil's justice system should operate. This is a dangerous precedent, as it could embolden other foreign leaders to interfere in Brazil's internal affairs. The reaction from Brazil's government has been fierce, with many officials denouncing the sanctions as a violent and arrogant act that undermines the country's sovereignty. José Guimarães, a congressperson from the left-wing Workers' Party, called the sanctions a direct attack on Brazilian democracy and sovereignty, while Gleice Hoffmann, a top minister and one of Lula's closest allies, expressed the government's utter repudiation of the absurd measure. But it's not just the left that's criticizing Trump's move. Conservative politicians such as João Amoedo and Eduardo Leite have also spoken out against the sanctions, arguing that they represent an unacceptable attempt at foreign interference in Brazil's justice system. So, what do you think? Is Trump's move a legitimate attempt to protect Bolsonaro's rights? Or is it a blatant attempt to undermine Brazilian democracy? Should foreign leaders be able to dictate the fate of judges in other countries, or is this a dangerous precedent that could have far-reaching consequences? Let us know in the comments. The Magnitsky sanctions, which were used to target Moraes, were named after Sergei Magnitsky, a Russian tax lawyer who died in a Moscow prison in 2009. After being imprisoned for exposing high-level corruption. They have been used since 2017 to sanction individuals accused of involvement in serious human rights abuses, including Saudi Arabian officials involved in the 2018 murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and Nicaraguan officials linked to a deadly crackdown designed to keep dictator Daniel Ortega in power. But legal experts and human rights activists are voicing astonishment and consternation. As the debate rages on, one thing is clear. Trump's move has sparked a heated controversy that will have far-reaching implications for Brazilian democracy and the global community. So, stay tuned for further updates on this developing story, and let us know what you think in the comments.